War Rapport family, it's your boy Mike G here with my guy Ike Jones. We got a special guest for you guys today. Auburn linebacker from 2001 to 2005, 2004 member of the undefeated team, and Terrius Williams. And Terrius, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother. Glad to be here.
All right, AT, listen, we're really happy to have you here today to talk a little bit about linebackers. Now, you're our first linebacker interview. And, you know, you came in 2001 in my class, and you came in behind some really good linebackers in Auburn history. And, you know, a theme on our show is development. So I was hoping you would talk to us a little bit today about what it was like to come up behind those guys and then start for an undefeated team. If I remember correctly, you played behind Mark Brown, yes, Carlos Dansby, Dontarius Thomas, some good guys. Can you talk about what it was like learning from that level of talent?
So I think it all started really, man, with the linebacker coach we had at the time, Joe Witt Jr. Joe Witt, should I say. He set the tone. And number one, you know, we had very talented linebackers. You had DT, Mark Brown, Carlos Dansby, all NFL linebackers. And I think, you know, they set the tone. They set the mentality very on. When I was a young buck coming into the university, I knew that, hey, I had big shoes to fill every day. And so I really looked up to them. And I think that Coach Witt really, really set that tone really early.
That's dope, man. You know, it was good times down there on the plains during that period of time. But talk to me a little bit more about just the mentorship that you had from those older guys, even the coaching staff. But like, what were the things that they did to help you transition to being ready to feel like you were ready to take on SEC play as a starting linebacker?
Well, first, I think it really just started with accountability. I mean, I know Coach Witt was big on accountability. When I played the weak side linebacker position, number one, I had to study the offenses that we were going to play against, understand their strengths, their weaknesses. How can I attack them, and being accountable for my own particular role that I'm playing on defense. I just remember being in the huddle or being in a game. And if a running back broke for, let's say, 10 yards, the front seven, all four linemen and the linebackers, the three of us, we knew exactly who fault it was, because we all looked at each other in huddle and said, hey, man, that was you. Were you in the B gap like you were supposed to be? And then it was just that accountability where, you know, even my defensive line would say, hey, that's my job. I mean, that's my fault. You know, I should have been here. I got reached or I got caught and I shouldn't have been there. And I think that's what kind of helped mold us to just be accountable to each other every day.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of accountability, I want to talk a little bit about brotherhood, right? You were tight with Travis, and I believe it was Karibi Dede that was playing there with you guys, and you guys were really, in my book, an underrated group of linebackers. Can you talk about how your relationships off the field translated to on the field success?
Well, you know, they are my brothers, and it's so funny. I'm the only one that's not coaching now, but, you know, Karibi Dede is now a linebacker coach, and I think he's in Colorado State right now. Travis, as you guys, you know, he's down at UCF right now. So I think it was just a brotherhood. And I always tell people, you know, when we played linebacker, personally, I didn't know I was undersized until I tried to go to the NFL. You know, so when it came down to me, I knew that I had a job to do every day, you know, playing on the field. It didn't matter how big I was. I just had to get that job done. And like I say, we didn't really worry about size at all. We didn't really look at it that way.
So AT, in your previous answer to my last question and a little bit in this one, you talked a little bit about one of my favorite things, which is watching film. Like, I love going in and trying to break down film. But just talk to me a little bit about some of that preparation that was necessary for you. Like, what kind of things were you all doing to make sure that you had, you know, the responsibilities laid out? Because you said when you got back to the huddle, you guys knew exactly whose responsibility it was to be in a particular gap. So talk to me a little bit about how you were getting prepared to be in that space, especially considering you said you were undersized, right? So you had to make sure you were there a little bit faster than everybody else. So talk to me about that preparation that was necessary.
Well, you know, to answer that question, I think it all starts on being your own. We needed, from the defensive front, the front seven, we all need to be seven defensive coordinators, so to speak. We needed to know exactly what the offense was trying to do with us. I would know from a film, looking down to, you know, where the fullback aligns, to what plays the offense is run based off of the fullback alignment. Is the fullback behind the quarterback? Is the fullback, you know, on the weak side, strong side? You know, linemen, reading linemen's hands, how much weight are on their fingers, on their hands, and formations, thinking about motion. all that plays into the fact of what plays different offensive coordinators like to run. And you really had to know that before the game. And I always tell people now, I've been an undersized linebacker. I didn't need Coach Chisholm to call a blitz. I blitzed every play because everywhere I went was fast. I'm like, I got to go. If I sit here and wait, I'm going to get hit and get knocked 10 yards down the field the opposite direction. So every play for me, what I would like to say was a blitz. I had to go somewhere fast. But before you can go anywhere fast, you got to know what they're trying to hit you with and how the offense is trying to attack you. So we just knew where we needed to be based on what they were doing.
Okay, so playing fast, going with that theme, and how quickly you process the game, right, is going to be important. Now, we had a new defensive coordinator down on the Plains, Derek Mason, and a lot of these guys are going to be going from a 4-3 to a 3-4. Now, you came in under one defensive coordinator, and then Chisholm came in, and you guys, maybe were asked to do some different things. Can you talk a little bit about how a player gets mentally adjusted going from one defensive scheme to another, and what things can they do to continue to play fast in a new system?
Well, I think one of the challenges that we're going to have converting over to a 3-4 is you got to have big defensive ends. You got to have big guys that can shed blockers. You got to have linebackers that can be two gap players. I think one of the challenges we had last year being in a 4-3 defense, we didn't have pass rushers. I remember when I was there and we played in a 4-3 defense, we had some of the baddest pressure. Nobody wanted to see Quentin Groves and Stanley McClover coming off of the edge. These guys were 4-5, 4. Quentin Groves is like a 4-3 on a good day. 4-3-8 from a speed standpoint. So you got to have pass rushers to run the 4-3. So I think, from my opinion, that was one of the challenges that we had this year. We didn't have a legitimate shot at getting a rush on the opposing offenses at the time. So now we're going to transition to that 3-4. So now I got to ask, okay, it was going to be a challenge because now we have linebackers that are small. We got 4-3 linebackers, and we're trying to convert to a 3-4 defense, which is going to be a little bit of a challenge too. And it's going to take some time. So I think that's where recruiting is going to be really big and trying to see what Coach Harsin is able to do moving forward with the defense.
Now, AT, you said you're not coaching, brother, but you sound like you might have a little coaching, down in your loins now. And, I'm just saying, Coach Harsin and, Coach Mason, you watching, you see your man's over here talking that talk. You might need to holler at him. You need a new scout or something. Anyway, we're not going to dwell on that too long. We're going to get back into this interview. But now, I like what you said about just understanding the difference in the types of personnel that you're going to need for different types of schemes, right? So when you were making that transition from high school over into college, like what were some of the things that you felt like you needed to get better at in your game to allow you to play at the next level, to allow you to be ready to get in there for that starting duty? You talked a little bit about the mentorship from the other guys, but what are the things that helped you to kind of make that transition to be an SEC caliber linebacker?
I think number one, it always starts with toughness. You got to, in order to compete in the SEC, you got to be mentally tough, physically tough, and also just speed. So for me, it was just adjusting to the speed of the game. When I was signed in 2001, I was really signed as we basically ran a 5-2 defense. It was a rover and whip type of system with John Lovett. And I was assigned to be a rover, which is totally different. And in high school, to answer your question, I was a defensive end in high school. Didn't know I was undersized playing high school defensive end either. But, one of the things my coach told me in high school, we're going to sit you on the line of scrimmage. Nobody gets outside of you. And they run away from you. You just run it down every time. And that's what I did. It was just all about competing. I never knew, like I said, I was an undersized type of player. But I think for Auburn to really get back to that next level, I think you got to have all the players on the defense having that type of mentality. I think that Travis did a really good job in having some dogs in the linebackers from that standpoint. But I think from a personnel standpoint, we got to really be able to, get that from the defensive line as well as in the secondary as well.
Okay, so going from a 4-3 to the 3-4, can you talk to us a little bit about how the linebacker's responsibility may be different? How is running up and filling the run gaps going to be different? How is it going to be different for them dropping back in coverage? What are the big differences you're going to see in how they're going to be asked to stop the run and cover the pass in a 3-4?
Well, I think, from a passing coverage standpoint, it's going to be a lot of the same from what we previously had. I think the challenge is going to be running, how we're going to stop the run. And when from a linebacker standpoint, I can't play linebacker I wasn't big enough to play in a 3-4, to be honest. Because when you think about middle linebackers in a 3-4, these guys got to be built like the Mark Browns of the world. They got to be 6'2", 240 pounds. If you look at Alabama, if you look at their outside linebackers in a 3-4 defense, these guys are 6'5", 240, 250. So you really got to get some bigger guys in those positions. And the reason that they got to be bigger, because you got to play what they call a two-gap type of thing. So if a lineman comes up on you, can you throw the lineman off to the left or to the right to get and cover multiple gaps? And I think that's going to be a challenge, as we continue to build the personnel on our team and get the right recruits and the right players on campus to be able to play those multiple positions or those multiple roles. I think, and to add to your question too, with our defense back in the day, I didn't play a whole lot of two gaps. It was, hey, AT, if they're running to you, the fullback's coming to you, the B gap bubble, you take on the fullback, you turn the ball back inside the linebacker, who was Travis at the time. Travis had to come over the top of the guard and make that play. And so I think it's just a different type of defense to run. I think our defense was 100% more a disciplined defense, where that we knew, like I mentioned before, like we're coming to the huddle and we knew who made the mistake. I think sometimes when you get over into a 3-4, it's some, wishy-washy. Yeah, it could have been him or it could have been them, and who was responsible of making that particular play. So I think it's just a little bit different.
Interesting. I just knew Mike was going to ask this question after you said something about being undersized. I thought we were going to get into strength and conditioning necessary, but we'll talk about it now since you said, figuring out how to shed blocks and all that kind of thing. But let's talk about what the strength and conditioning program was like when you were at Auburn. Like, what were some of the things? Because you said you came in undersized. How were they trying to make sure that you were playing at the right weight, the right size, the right strength to be able to go out there?
So I think that's a great question. And so, my strength and conditioning guy was Coach Yachts. Yeah. And if anybody heard about Coach Yachts, he's the reason I get accused now of being ex-military. If you look at my face, you look at how I act, it's because I've been through Yachts' system for 5 years. He had a certain level of accountability. I remember one time as a freshman, we were at a bowl game and we were playing in Atlanta at the Chick-fil-A Bowl. And I was with some of my signing class, Carnell Williams, Travis, several other guys. But anyway, it was some guys that were starters and some guys that were not. And we were late to a meeting for whatever reason may be. When we got back to Auburn that next week, all 5 of us were there pushing boards, punishment, workouts. Coach Yachts did not care who you were. If you didn't do what you're supposed to do, it was disciplinary actions for everybody involved. Everybody, another example, he had Yachts time. We all set our clocks to what his clock was. That's what it was. It was, if he said you got a 6 o'clock workout, you don't set your clock based on what any other factor of what your phone says. Yachts time was like 7.5 minutes early. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that easy to say, hey, he's 10 minutes early or he's 5 minutes. No, it was like 7.5 minutes. So everybody had to set their watch to him. And so when you start thinking about a strength and conditioning standpoint, my whole 5 years of being on campus, I was never big enough. I was always in the weight gain group. So Yachts had several guys that stayed in a weight loss group because we had one player, I remember, he had gained like 25 pounds over Christmas break. He was one of our linemen. I mean, he could put it on. But anyway, so that particular guy was in a weight loss group always. For me, I was in a weight gain group. So the way that we monitored that throughout the process was when I came on campus, I was 175 pounds. Yachts would set a goal to say at the end of the summer, you need to be up to 185. You got to gain 10 pounds. And over the span of each week, I would have to gain a pound to continue to hit that marker where I needed to be for when that season kind of came around. I guess the good thing, I like Coach Russell. Coach Russell was an assistant on the staff when I was there under Coach Yachtsu. I mean, I think he brought a different type of element from a strength and conditioning standpoint. He was one of those new age strength and conditioning guys. Right. Innovative, I guess you can say. But for me, I always say, if I got a 300-pound guy on my chest, I need to get the 300 pounds and lift it. I don't need no fancy way to do it. I need to get his butt off of me. That's just the reality. And I think, Yachts really focused a lot on Olympic lifts. Coach Yachts was a power lifter. I mean, he knew how to teach us how to be strong and get the most out of us. And that was kind of his way of doing things compared to, I think Coach Russell was a little bit more innovative. I think he fit more with what Gus was trying to do.
So, strength and conditioning. This is a big theme on our show. We talk a lot to our listeners about strength and conditioning, right? And, like you said, Yachts was Old Testament. He was Old Testament wrath of God type of guy in the weight room. Talking about some of the interesting things you did, I remember at one point while you were playing, you talk about him teaching you Olympic lifts and how to get a 300-pound guy off you. I remember him taking the benches out of the weight room and saying, you don't play the game on your back. so you're not going to practice on your back, right?
Correct.
Yachts used to say, if you're doing this, if you're on your back this much, you're getting your ass, you get your ass whooped. Yeah.
Ain't good.
So, so he would teach you guys how to move 300 pounds standing up. But we've interviewed quite a few of you guys, and every one of you has an interesting story about something Yachts had you do that still gives you nightmares to this day. So, can you tell us what was that thing? What is your nightmare? What is your 2021 nightmare that you still have because of something Yachts had you do in the weight room?
So my one thing that Yachts killed me on. So back in 2000 and I think it was 2000, whenever we played in the Citrus Bowl that year. So it was my redshirt freshman year. I think it was 2002. Mm-hmm. And in that particular game, I broke my leg. So I had a non-contact femur fracture. And so I was on crutches for a while, had surgery for a while. And being young, I really didn't have the discipline that I needed. So a lot of the discipline that I learned, that I still carry on through this day, is what I learned from Coach Yachts and Coach Witt, some of those older guys that were really, big on in my life, instrumental in making sure I was disciplined. But anyway, long story short, Yachts had a thing, and I don't know if you've heard anybody say about pushing a board. So pushing a board, the best guy, you should ask Anthony Mix about it. But Yachts he would set a time. So it was basically, gases you go have, down and back, and he would set a time to say, hey, you got to get this done in, let's say, 10 minutes. Where if you got really good and did it in 10 minutes, the next time you got a punishment workout, I said, now you got to do it in 9 minutes because you did it too easy last time. And so every time as you got better in it, he would reduce the time. So anyway, so I got in trouble in that meeting. And like I mentioned, I had a broken leg at the time. So I couldn't even really work out. So I'm like, man, y'all can't get me. I can't push the board. I can't even run. I can't walk. So I show up one morning. I had punishment workout. I think I was late to a meeting or something like that. So I get there in the meeting, and he had put basically 4 4x4s together. It was almost like a dolly that you buy from Home Depot or Lowe's that you put appliances on and that you can push it across your house when you're moving. And he said, basically, AT, you're going to get down on your knees and you're going to slide across this thing like a skateboard. And so I had to do my punishment workouts just like I had previously, but I was on a board sitting down on my knees since I couldn't run at the time. Yachts didn't play, man. Yachts is like, if you got punishment workouts, you're going to get it done. I don't care. If it's a will, it's a way. And so like when y'all start talking about toughness, that's the type of toughness that this guy had. He didn't care. He's like, dude, you hurt. I get it. I feel sorry for you, but you owe me some sets. So you're going to get your sets in today, however you need to do it. And keep in mind, like I mentioned before, he still timed them.
I love that story, man, because I think it's one of those things when you dive into it, like you said, it goes back to that first word you said, which is accountability. Like everybody's got to be accountable for their actions. So though you can't do it this other way, you still have something that's we need to get this in, man. So that's a beautiful thing. I'm going to shift gears for just a second and we can come back to this, but I do want to talk a little bit about your entry into the program. So like your recruitment, like what was that like? We haven't talked to a lot of these guys about kind of what the recruitment process, but you were a little closer to Auburn. Some of the other guys we talked about have talked to in the past, they didn't really know anything about it. So were you familiar with the Auburn-Alabama rivalry, and kind of what was your recruitment process that brought you down into Auburn?
That's a really good question, and people are surprised when I give my answer. So, my first Auburn football game, I was actually on the team going through the tunnel. So that's a little bit of my story. So for me, as I mentioned before, I was an undersized player anyway, playing at SEC, but I played defensive end in high school. And I was fortunate. So my junior year, at the summer of my junior year, going into my senior year is where my recruitment process kind of started, where, my coach in high school at the time, basically he took all his seniors and he said, hey guys, we're going to go to these 2-day camps up at different universities, and we want to try to get you guys some exposure. So the first camp I went to with him was he took us all up to UGA. And so for me, just as you mentioned before, like mentality is like, what was the mentality? So when I was a defensive end in high school. I ran track, in the off season because the coaches made us do something in the spring. I didn't know any better. The coaches said, you're not doing a spring sport, so you're going to run track. So I ran track every year. So we go to this senior camp. And when I get to Athens, we're getting ready to play against these recruits, and I see the coaches from UGA looking at some South Florida guys. There's some wide receivers out there, highly recruited. They say, this kid right here, he's the number one wide receiver from Miami, Florida, blah, blah, blah. And I went to this particular camp as a defensive back based on size. So the first thing I did, I said, well, coach, I'm going against that kid. That's what I want to go against. If y'all looking at him, I'm going to go up against him. And so my whole philosophy at that time was, I didn't know how to cover. I was just athletic enough. But my whole philosophy was, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do man press, I'm going to put my hands on him, and then he's going to have to run from there to get out and run. And my philosophy, I just ran with him. And so we went through that camp, like I said, did some safety stuff, did some corner stuff. And at the end of that particular camp, UGA offered me a scholarship. My coach came to me and said, hey, the University of Georgia liked what they saw from you, this particular camp. They want to offer you a scholarship. Do you want it? What's the question that I was asking? Being me at the time, I hadn't had an offer from anybody. And he asked me, did I want a scholarship? I said, yeah, I'll take it. I thought if I said no, then they were going to take it away from me. So next thing I know, recruiters are kind of calling me saying, hey, you've committed to the University of Georgia. I didn't know what that meant at the time, if I'm being honest with you. But and so, so I committed to them, let's say in that summer going into my senior year. My senior year, I think I probably went to almost all the UGA home games my senior year, being one of the recruits. It was me and another guy that I was in high school senior with me, Reggie McFadden. We both committed to UGA. He's a defensive back, and I was a defensive end on our defense at Shaw High School, and we both were committed to UGA that whole season. At the end of the season, I think Jim Dunnan in Georgia, they end up, he got fired, the coach got fired, and during that process, my recruitment was kind of opened up. One thing I didn't mention. So that summer too, I also went to the Auburn camp, the same type of camp. And Auburn offered me a scholarship, but it was after Georgia. And I kind of told the coaches at the time, hey, I've already committed. But it was just competition. It was a competition thing. They saw that Georgia had offered me, so they wanted to offer me too. And so, like I mentioned, I was committed to Georgia for all of my senior year. We rolled around to January. They fired Jim Donnan. I opened back up my recruitment process. And that's when Tuberville and his crew really start, recruiting me hard. And for me being in Columbus and all my family being here in Columbus, it was a 30, 45-minute drive over to Auburn. So I think it was a very easy decision for me to switch over to Auburn. And I'm just happy that I did make that decision.
So I want to stick with recruitment here for a second, because this is kind of like a hot topic with the fans right now. We switched coaches before National Signing Day, and a lot of recruits jumped ship. And there was a mad dash to keep recruits on board. So they got some surprise recruits. Can you talk a little bit about the importance that the coach played in your recruitment over the university, right? Something that I tell our listeners is that student athletes primarily commit to coaches and not institutions. So you said Jim Donnan got fired and then you opened back up your recruitment. How important is that relationship with the coach during the recruitment and whether that kid goes to that school and sticks with that school?
I think that's a really good question because, I feel like anytime you get an offer, somebody's believing in you. I think, one of the things I heard Travis say most recently, in one of his interviews, recently, and I think when he was in Miami, actually, but somebody asked him, well, Travis, you're down in Miami now, what do you think about how can you get 5-star recruits? And Travis' philosophy and answer to that question was everybody I recruit is a 5-star in my book. Because I would not recruit them if I didn't feel like they can fit in my system or what I'm trying to do. And I say that to say, I think that when a coach comes in and recruits you, you build that relationship, you build that rapport. That's your direct connection to the university. I think for me, as I started to visit campus, I did my official visit. I think it is something which I know it hurt Harsin this year and our staff that we could not get kids on campus to get the feel of Auburn University, because I think that's something that is special. And I think it did hurt us this year, but you really got to have that connection to the people. And I know a lot of people hate the transfer portal, but I'm a big fan of it. I'm probably, the minority in that situation, but I think it gives people to have an opportunity to go where they feel like people want them.
This is part 1 of the War Rapport's interview with former Auburn linebacker A.T. Williams. Click like and subscribe for more content like this, and tune in next week for part 2.